The massive ship called Harmony drifted silently into Earth orbit, its sleek purple hull catching the sunlight as it positioned itself carefully above the blue planet. Inside the ship's main diplomatic chamber, Ambassador Zixtk adjusted the breathing apparatus that hung around his slender neck. The gravity on this ship was set to Earth standard, which made his 4 legs ache slightly, but protocol demanded accommodation for the new species they were meeting. "Final approach complete, Ambassador," reported his aide, a younger Vexorian whose scales hadn't yet developed the deep violet of maturity. "The human delegation will dock in approximately 20 Earth minutes." Zixtk nodded, his large eyes blinking, in sequence rather than together. After 300 years as a diplomatic representative of the Galactic Confederation, he had overseen 47 first contact scenarios. Humans, however, had already proven unusual before they even arrived. Unlike most species who reacted to the discovery of alien life with either religious awe or terrified military preparations, humans had responded to the Confederation's initial communication with thousands of different reactions simultaneously. Some humans celebrated, some protested, some created art, some spread false information, and their governments argued amongst themselves while still somehow presenting a unified diplomatic front. Remember, Zixtk instructed his team of 12 representatives from different Confederation species. Humans are classified as a contradiction-tolerant species. They can hold opposing thoughts simultaneously. Do not be alarmed by this. The Plixian scientist Morcath chittered nervously, her feathery antennae twitching. "Is it true they engage in recreational fear?" "Yes," Zixtk confirmed. "They deliberately expose themselves to frightening stimuli for enjoyment. Their entertainment often features scenarios they themselves would find disturbing in reality." The docking bay signal chimed, interrupting further discussion. The humans had arrived early. Zixtk straightened his ceremonial robe. "Places, everyone. Remember your cultural briefings." The airlock cycled open and 6 humans entered the chamber. Zixtk immediately identified the leader, a female human with dark curly hair pulled back tightly, wearing a blue suit adorned with small pins that likely denoted her authority. "Ambassador Zixtk," she said, pronouncing his name with surprising accuracy. "I'm Dr. Eliza Murphy, Earth Union Diplomatic Corps. On behalf of humanity, we are honored by this historic meeting." Zixtk performed the traditional greeting gesture of his species, crossing his upper limbs and lowering his head briefly. "The Confederation welcomes Earth's representatives. May our meeting bring mutual understanding." Dr. Murphy introduced her team, scientists, linguists, and a military representative. Major Frank Johnson, a tall male with short gray hair and a straight posture. The major studied the alien delegation with obvious curiosity rather than fear, his eyes lingering on each different species. The initial meeting proceeded smoothly. The universal translators worked well, despite occasional confusion with human idioms. Dr. Murphy presented Earth's history and cultural overview, while her scientific team asked insightful questions about Confederation technology. "You've adapted remarkably quickly to the concept of interstellar community," noted Zixtk as they moved to the observation deck offering a stunning view of Earth. "Many species require decades to process the psychological impact." Dr. Murphy smiled. "Humans have been imagining meeting aliens for centuries. Our fiction prepared us in a way." "Fiction?" asked Zixtk. "Ah, yes, your deliberate creation of untrue scenarios. Our researchers found this practice fascinating." Major Johnson, who had been quietly observing until now, joined the conversation. "Ambassador, you might say humans have been rehearsing this meeting since we first looked up at the stars." The Confederation delegation seemed impressed by the humans' adaptability. The meeting extended longer than planned, with both sides exchanging more information than the standard first contact protocol suggested. 3 days later, the diplomatic teams gathered for a more informal cultural exchange dinner. The human delegation had brought Earth foods that could safely be consumed by various alien physiologies, and similarly, the Confederation offered compatible dishes from various worlds. Seated beside Major Johnson, Ambassador Zixtk found himself engaged in what humans called small talk. Major, I understand your role includes security assessment. How do humans approach potential threats in diplomatic situations? Johnson chewed thoughtfully on something the humans called pineapple before answering. We try to prepare for everything. Part of my job is looking at every situation and asking what could go wrong. An interesting approach, said Zixtk. In Confederation psychology, excessive focus on negative outcomes is considered counterproductive. Johnson laughed. Well, we have a saying, hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Zixtk tilted his head, a gesture he had adopted when meeting species with similar body language. This is curious. You simultaneously maintain positive expectations while preparing for negative ones? Exactly, Johnson said, taking a sip from his glass. It's basic risk management. Finding this concept fascinating, Zixtk decided to explore further. In Vexorian culture, directly discussing possible negative outcomes was considered proper and rational. Among the humans' material had been references to various catastrophes they had survived as a species. If I may ask, Major Johnson, in your assessment role, what is the worst that could happen in our current diplomatic arrangement? How do humans prepare for such possibilities? The question seemed innocent enough to Zixtk, a standard risk assessment inquiry. But he noticed an immediate change in Johnson's demeanor. The human's eyes widened slightly and his mouth formed what Zixtk recognized from his cultural training as a grin. The worst that could happen? Johnson repeated, setting down his drink. Well, that's a question you might regret asking a human, Ambassador. Dr. Murphy, overhearing the conversation, shot Johnson a warning look. Major, perhaps we should discuss the Confederation's art instead. But Johnson continued, his enthusiasm growing visibly. Just as a thought exercise, Ambassador. Let's see. Your ship could suffer a catastrophic power failure, trapping us all in orbit. Or there could be a misunderstanding between our species leading to an accidental declaration of war. Or perhaps a previously unknown solar phenomenon could erupt, forcing an emergency evacuation. Zixtk noticed other humans at the table had turned to listen, many now offering their own scenarios. What about an oxygen recycler malfunction? Suggested one of the scientists. Or a computer virus that jumps between our different systems, added another. Dr. Murphy sighed but seemed resigned. I apologize, Ambassador. You've accidentally triggered something of a human pastime. Imagining disasters? Asked Zixtk, fascinated despite his confusion. Not just imagining them, Dr. Murphy explained. Figuring out how we'd survive them. As the dinner continued, Zixtk observed with growing amazement as the humans enthusiastically discussed increasingly unlikely disaster scenarios, all while continuing to eat and maintain a friendly atmosphere. More strangely, with each terrible possibility, they immediately began developing solutions. Zixtk made a note to update the Confederation's profile on human psychology. He had just discovered something important about this new species, though he wasn't yet sure if it should be classified as alarming or admirable. What he didn't realize was that he had just asked the one question you should never ask a human. Word of Ambassador Zixtk's question spread through the human delegation like wildfire. By the next morning cycle aboard the Harmony, every human diplomat, scientist, and support staff member was discussing potential disasters and solutions. What had begun as dinner conversation had evolved into something the aliens found both fascinating and disturbing. Dr. Carol Wright, the Earth delegation's chief meteorologist, cornered a blue-feathered Plixian scientist in the ship's botanical garden. The alien was peacefully studying Earth plant samples when Carol approached with a datapad and an enthusiastic smile. I've been thinking about our conversation last night, Carol said, though they hadn't actually spoken before. Have you considered what would happen if Earth's magnetic field suddenly reversed during our negotiations? The Plixian's feathers flattened against its head in confusion. Is this likely to occur? Probably not during our lifetimes, Carol admitted cheerfully. But it has happened before in Earth's history. The poles flip every few 100,000 years. We're actually overdue. She showed the bewildered alien her datapad, which displayed complex simulations of magnetic field disruptions and their effects on communications, animal migration, and satellite functions. I've developed these models to predict how we could maintain diplomatic communications even if it happened tomorrow. See this backup system? It would use quantum entanglement principles instead of traditional signals. The Plixian scientist tried to edge away, but Carol followed, now explaining how humans had prepared for massive solar flares that could knock out power grids worldwide. Across the ship in the engineering section, a similar scene was unfolding. Engineer Paul Garcia had cornered 3 Vexorian technicians who had been tasked with explaining the ship's waste recycling systems to the humans. So your filtration can handle biological contaminants. But what about prions? Paul asked, leaning over a technical display. Prions? Repeated the lead Vexorian, unfamiliar with the term. Misfolded proteins. Very bad news. Nearly impossible to destroy, Paul explained. They cause diseases like fatal insomnia in humans. What if something like that got into the ship's water system? Before the aliens could respond, Paul pulled out his own schematics. I've drafted some modifications to your filters. It would only take about 3 days to implement. Better safe than sorry, right? The Vexorians stared at the humans' designs, which were surprisingly well conceived despite being based on technology he had only learned about yesterday. Throughout the day, similar conversations occurred across the Harmony. Humans approached, different alien representatives with scenarios ranging from reasonable concerns to wildly improbable disasters. More troubling to the Confederation delegates was the humans' apparent enjoyment of these discussions. By midday, Ambassador Zixetki received an urgent message from Dr. Klarvak, the Confederation's leading xenopsychologist. The ambassador retreated to his private quarters to take the call. Ambassador, I've been monitoring the humans' behavior, said Dr. Klarvak, her tentacled face filling the communication screen. Your question appears to have triggered what I can only describe as a species-wide thought exercise. Zixtke's skin darkened with concern. Are they preparing for aggression? I don't believe so, Klarvak replied. Their disaster scenarios include saving Confederation lives, not just their own. It seems to be a cultural phenomenon, rather than a military strategy. I recommend politely changing the subject whenever possible. I will inform the delegation, Zixtke said. Unfortunately, the ambassador's warning came too late. When he reached the main conference room for the afternoon session, he found Dr. Murphy speaking with the ship's security chief. Behind them on a large display was a detailed evacuation plan for the ship's central section. Dr. Murphy, Zixtke said carefully. I see you've been busy. Murphy turned, looking slightly embarrassed. Ambassador, I apologize for the enthusiasm of my team. When humans hear what's the worst that could happen, we can't help ourselves. So I've observed, Zixetic replied. May I ask why your species finds such negative possibilities enjoyable? Murphy considered the question. It's not that we enjoy the disasters themselves. We enjoy solving problems, especially challenging ones. Imagining terrible situations gives us difficult problems to solve. There's satisfaction in knowing you've prepared for something, even if it never happens. Their conversation was interrupted when Major Johnson entered with the ship's navigation officer, a small green alien with 6 eyes arranged in a circle around its head. Ambassador Doctor, Johnson greeted them. Officer Zilg here has been explaining the ship's navigation systems. Did you know the Harmony doesn't have contingency protocols for navigating through a dense meteor shower while experiencing power fluctuations? The navigation officer blinked all 6 eyes in sequence. Because the probability is infinitesimally small. But not zero, Johnson countered with a smile. We've drafted some emergency procedures that might help. Zixtke noticed that despite the officer's apparent discomfort, he was studying Johnson's suggestions with interest. Over the next week, the pattern continued. The humans had begun implementing small modifications to various ship systems. Most were minor changes that the Confederation officers permitted after careful review. What alarmed Zixtke was not the changes themselves, but the speed at which humans identified potential weaknesses in systems they had only just learned about. During a private dinner with Dr. Murphy, Zixik finally addressed his concerns directly. "Your people seem to have an unusual relationship with potential danger," he said carefully. "In many Confederation cultures, focusing on negative possibilities is seen as inviting them." Murphy smiled. "In human history, the people who survived weren't always the strongest or smartest. Often they were the ones who prepared for unlikely disasters." "Even preparing for things that never happened?" Zixik asked. "Especially those things," Murphy replied. "On Earth we have a saying, better to have and not need than to need and not have." Zixik considered this an interesting philosophy. Their conversation was interrupted by an aide who entered with urgent news. The Confederation's Grand Assembly had arrived a day early for the formal welcoming ceremony. The ship would be receiving 20 high-ranking officials from across the galaxy within the hour. "We should prepare to greet them," Zixik said, rising from his seat. "Of course," Murphy agreed. "And don't worry, we've already updated the docking bay emergency protocols to account for the additional ships." Zixik felt a flutter of concern. The humans had been aboard his ship for only one Earth week, and already they were changing safety protocols for the Grand Assembly's arrival. As they walked toward the main docking bay, he wondered if perhaps he had made a terrible mistake by asking that simple question. What he didn't yet realize was that the humans' unusual habit was about to be put to the test in ways none of them could have anticipated. 3 months had passed since the humans first came aboard the Harmony. What began as simple diplomatic meetings had evolved into detailed negotiations for Earth joining the Galactic Confederation. A joint space station had been constructed in Earth orbit as a permanent meeting place between the species. The station, named Unity, combined both human and alien technology and served as a symbol of cooperation. But the human tendency to prepare for the worst had grown stronger with each passing day. In the station's engineering section, Susan Hill was elbow-deep in the main power distribution panel. The human engineer had dark circles under her eyes from working extra shifts, but she seemed more energetic than tired as she rewired complex circuits. 2 Vexorian technicians watched with a mixture of concern and admiration. "This modification will allow the station to withstand solar flares 10 times more powerful than any recorded in your star's history," Susan explained, as she connected another backup system. One of the Vexorians, named Krex, gently touched her shoulder. "Engineer Hill, while your work is impressive, there is no indication such a flare will ever occur. The statistical probability is 1 in 3 million, I know," Susan interrupted without looking up from her work. "But if it happens without these safeguards, everyone on this station dies. Is that a risk you're willing to take?" Krex had no answer. The math made sense, even if the human's intensity seemed excessive. Across the station in the security office, Officer Greg Martinez was running simulations on his computer. The screen displayed a rotating model of the station with various sections, highlighted in different colors. When Ambassador Zixik entered, Greg quickly stood up. "Ambassador, good timing. I wanted to show you the new evacuation protocols we've developed." Zixik approached cautiously. In the 3 months since his innocent question about worst-case scenarios, he had learned that human enthusiasm for disaster preparation could be overwhelming. "What situation are you preparing for today, Officer Martinez?" he asked. Greg's face lit up. "Dimensional rifts." Zixik blinked his large eyes in sequence. "Dimensional rifts? I'm not familiar with this phenomenon." "Well, they're theoretical," Greg admitted. "But based on some of the physics your scientists shared with us, we believe it's possible that under very specific conditions, the fabric between dimensions could tear, creating a rift that might allow matter from another universe to enter ours." The ambassador stared at the human. "And you believe this might happen on our station?" "Probably not," Greg shrugged. "But we've never had technology like your quantum drive so close to Earth before. Better safe than sorry, right?" Before Zixik could respond, his communication device chimed. The final members of the Confederation's Grand Assembly had arrived for tomorrow's official welcoming ceremony. As Earth's formal introduction to the galactic community, The event was of utmost importance. When Zixit arrived at the docking bay, he found Admiral Linda Pearson already greeting the Assembly's leader, Grand Counselor Nixvon of the Athorian species. The Admiral was a tall, commanding human woman with short blonde hair and a crisp blue uniform adorned with gold insignia. "Grand Counselor," Admiral Pearson was saying as Zixit approached, "we're honored by your presence. We've prepared contingencies, in case your ship's quantum drive destabilizes. Don't worry, we've got 17 different evacuation routes mapped out." Zixit froze. In Athorian culture, discussing possible disasters before an important event was considered extremely bad luck, almost a guarantee that problems would occur. The Grand Counselor's skin, normally a pale blue, darkened to a deep navy color, a sign of serious offense in his species. "Admiral Pearson," Zixit cut in quickly, "perhaps we could show the Grand Counselor to his quarters first?" The Admiral nodded, seemingly unaware of the cultural misstep she had made. "Of course. We've prepared the East Wing with environment. Controls set to Athorian standard. We've also installed backup systems in case the primary environmental regulators fail." As they walked through the station's corridors, the Grand Counselor pulled Zixit aside while Admiral Pearson walked ahead. "Ambassador," Nixvon whispered harshly, "are all humans obsessed with disaster? This is the third one who has greeted me with scenarios of my death." "It's a cultural peculiarity," Zixit explained quietly. "They believe anticipating problems is a form of respect, showing they value your safety enough to prepare for any danger." The Grand Counselor was not satisfied. "This behavior must stop before the ceremony tomorrow. In our culture, inviting disaster with words can summon real tragedy." "I will speak with their leaders," Zixit promised. Later that evening, Zixit met with Dr. Murphy in her office. The human diplomat listened patiently as he explained the cultural concerns. "I understand completely," Murphy said when he finished. "I'll speak with our people immediately. The last thing we want is to offend the Assembly." "Thank you," Zixit said with relief. "I must ask, in the 3 months since my question about worst-case scenarios, has your team been constantly preparing for disasters?" Murphy smiled. "It's become something of a hobby among the staff. There's even a friendly competition between departments for the most creative yet plausible disaster scenario and solution." Zixit's skin darkened with concern. "Dr. Murphy, the Grand Assembly is disturbed by this behavior. In many Confederation cultures, discussing potential disasters is considered to invite them." "That's fascinating," Murphy replied. "In human culture, discussing disasters often helps prevent them. We believe ignoring potential problems is more dangerous than acknowledging them." Before Zixit could respond, the station's alert system activated. A calm computer voice announced, "Attention all personnel. Unknown spatial anomaly detected in Sector 7. This is not a drill. Please proceed to designated safety areas." Murphy's communication device immediately lit up with messages. She read them quickly, her expression growing serious. "It appears we have a situation developing near the station," she said. "Some kind of spatial distortion that wasn't there an hour ago." Zixit felt a chill run through his body. The Grand Counselor's cultural beliefs suddenly seemed less superstitious. Had the humans somehow invited disaster with their constant disaster planning? "How serious is it?" he asked. Murphy checked another message on her device. "The science team says it's growing. If it continues at the current rate, it could affect the station's structural integrity within 2 hours." Zixit stared at her. "This is exactly the kind of situation your people have been preparing for, isn't it?" Murphy nodded, her expression grim but determined. "Yes, Ambassador. And now we'll see if all that preparation pays off." The Unity station shuddered as another wave of gravitational distortion hit it. Warning lights flashed across control panels, and the emergency alert system continued its calm announcements. Confederation officers rushed through corridors, many looking panicked as they headed toward escape pods. In stark contrast, the humans moved with focused purpose. They weren't running toward escapes, but instead toward problem areas. In the main control room, Ambassador Zixit watched in amazement as Dr. Eliza Murphy coordinated the human response. She stood at the central console, surrounded by both human and alien staff, calmly giving orders. Susan, reroute power from sections 8 through 12 to reinforce the shields on the port side. Greg, implement evacuation plan Delta for all non-essential personnel. Joe, we need those sensor readings. Analyzed now. The Grand Counselor Nix Von burst into the control room, his blue skin now almost black with stress. Ambassador, we must evacuate immediately. The Confederation vessels are already preparing to depart. Zixtic looked to Murphy, who shook her head firmly. With all due respect, Counselor, she said, immediate evacuation would be dangerous. The spatial anomaly is generating unpredictable gravitational shears. Small vessels like escape pods would be torn apart. Then we use the larger ships, the Counselor insisted. Murphy pointed to the main screen showing the anomaly. The distortion field is expanding faster than your ships can accelerate. You'd be caught in it before reaching safe distance. Then we are doomed, the Counselor said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Murphy smiled. It wasn't a frightened smile or even a reassuring one. It was the confident smile of someone facing a challenge they had prepared for. Not necessarily, she said. We've been running drills for spatial anomalies since week 2. Across the room, a human scientist named Alan Peters was examining sensor data with intense focus. He called out suddenly, Dr. Murphy, I've identified a pattern in the anomaly's pulses. It's similar to theoretical models from Dr. Hawkins's work on quantum fluctuations. Murphy rushed to his console. Can we counteract it? Maybe, Alan said, pointing to complex readings on his screen. If we can generate an inverse frequency pattern and direct it at the center of the anomaly, we might be able to dampen its effects. The Grand Counselor looked bewildered. You've encountered such phenomena before? Never, Murphy admitted. But we've theorized about them and developed possible countermeasures. 6K watched as Murphy quickly organized the humans into teams. Each person seemed to know exactly what to do, as if they had rehearsed for this specific emergency. While the Confederation representatives huddled nervously near the exits, the humans worked with focused intensity. In the communications center, Joe Williams, a maintenance technician with 20 years of experience on Earth satellites, was repurposing the station's communication arrays. If we modify these arrays to emit the counter-frequency Dr. Peters calculated, we might be able to disrupt the anomaly's growth, Joe explained to a group of stunned alien technicians. I'll need access to the main power grid. One of the alien engineers, a Plixian named Morcath, chittered nervously. That would require manually rewiring the central junction box. It's too dangerous with the station experiencing structural stress. Joe grinned. Dangerous is just another word for interesting. On the observation deck, Admiral Pearson was coordinating with the remaining Confederation ships. When Zix TK arrived, she was speaking firmly to a Vexorian captain on the view screen. Captain, I understand your concerns, but your ship's engine signature is actually feeding the anomaly. You need to power down completely and maintain position. The captain looked offended. You expect the flagship of the Vexorian fleet to become defenseless based on a human theory? I expect you to follow the best scientific advice available, Pearson replied calmly. Unless you'd prefer to be pulled into whatever dimensional pocket is forming out there. Seeing Zixik, the Admiral ended the call and turned to him. Ambassador, we need the Confederation's help. Some of your ships are ignoring our warnings and attempting to flee. Their engine signatures are making the anomaly worse. Zixik nodded. I will speak with them. But Admiral, how can your people be so prepared for something no one has ever seen before? Remember when you asked what's the worst that could happen? Pearson said with a slight smile. This isn't even close to the worst we imagined. We had 3 different teams working on theoretical spatial anomalies last month. Another violent tremor shook the station, stronger than before. Overhead lights flickered, and for a moment, artificial gravity wavered. When the system stabilized, an urgent message came through the communication system. Control room, this is Peters. The anomaly is growing faster than predicted. Our counter frequency isn't strong enough. Murphy's voice responded. What do we need, Alan? We need to adjust the shield emitters manually to focus the counter frequency. Someone needs to take a maintenance pod out there. Silence fell across all channels. Going outside in a maintenance pod during this crisis seemed like suicide. Then a new voice broke in. "This is Lieutenant Samantha Lee. I can do it." Murphy responded immediately. "Sam, that's too risky. The gravitational forces could crush the pod." "The pod has reinforced shielding," Lee replied confidently. "And I've been running simulations on this scenario for weeks. I know exactly how to approach to minimize exposure to the gravitational shears." Zixtke listened in shock. The humans had been running simulations for a scenario they had never encountered. "This isn't even in the top 5 worst scenarios we ran drills for last month," Lee added, as if reading his thoughts. Murphy asked for a moment to consult with her team. Within minutes, they had developed a plan. Lieutenant Lee would take the pod out while Engineer Hill modified the shield emitters from inside the station. Together, they might be able to focus enough energy to disrupt the anomaly. From the control room view screen, Zixtke watched as a tiny maintenance pod emerged from the station's bay. It looked impossibly small against the backdrop of the swirling spatial distortion that now dominated the view. "Is she afraid?" Zixtke asked Murphy quietly. "Terrified, I'm sure," Murphy replied. "But Sam understands that sometimes one person needs to take a risk to save many." They watched in tense silence as the pod carefully maneuvered toward the first shield emitter. Several times gravitational waves caused it to spin wildly, but each time Lieutenant Lee regained control. Inside the station, Susan Hill communicated constantly with Lee, making precise adjustments to the shield emitters as they were repositioned. The two women worked in perfect harmony, as if they had practiced this exact scenario. Slowly, the combined efforts began to show results. The anomaly's growth slowed, then stopped, then gradually began to shrink. When Lieutenant Lee's pod finally returned to the station, the entire control room erupted in cheers. The crisis had been averted. The station had suffered damage, but remained intact. Most importantly, there had been no casualties. As the celebration continued around him, Ambassador Zixtke stood quietly observing the humans. He realized he had completely misjudged them from the beginning. The day after the crisis, the Unity station buzzed with activity. Repair crews worked to fix damaged sections while scientists studied the data collected during the spatial anomaly. The mood was focused but positive, especially among the humans, who seemed energized rather than exhausted by the near disaster. Ambassador Zixtke found Dr. Murphy in her office, reviewing reports on a tablet. When he entered, she looked up with a tired smile. "Ambassador, please come in. I was just going through the damage assessments." Zixtke sat across from her desk, his 4 legs folding neatly beneath him. "Dr. Murphy, I must understand something. Yesterday, when faced with an unprecedented danger, your people acted as if they had encountered it before." Murphy set down her tablet. "In our imagination, we had." "Please explain," Zixtke said. Murphy leaned back in her chair, considering how to answer. "Humans evolved on a planet full of dangers. Those who survived weren't always the strongest or fastest. Often they were the ones who could anticipate problems before they happened. But this was not a danger from your world," Zixtke pointed out. "No, but the principle is the same, Murphy replied. "When you asked what's the worst that could happen, you accidentally tapped into one of humanity's core strengths. We imagine disasters not because we're pessimists, but because we refuse to be caught unprepared." Zixtke's large eyes blinked in sequence. "Your people seemed almost happy during the crisis." Murphy laughed. "Not happy about the danger, but there is a certain satisfaction in using skills you've developed, like an athlete who has trained for years finally competing in an important game." Before Zixit could respond, his communication device chimed. The Grand Assembly had called an emergency session to discuss the previous day's events and Earth's pending admission to the Confederation. When Zixtke arrived at the meeting chamber, he found the Assembly members already engaged in heated debate. Grand Counselor Nix Von stood at the center, his blue skin still darker than normal, indicating stress. "The humans' behavior is concerning," the counselor was saying. "They constantly prepare for disasters. How do we know they aren't preparing to cause them?" A Plixian representative chittered in agreement. They modified our technology without proper authorization. This could be seen as aggressive action. The debate continued as Zixtk took his seat. Various representatives voiced concerns about humans joining the Confederation. Some suggested they were too unpredictable, others worried they might be secretly hostile. Finally, Zixtk stood to speak. The chamber fell silent as he walked to the center of the room. Honored assembly, I have spent more time with humans than anyone here. What you interpret as dangerous behavior, I now see as their greatest strength. He activated the room's display system, showing footage from the previous day's crisis. Observe how they responded. They did not panic. They did not flee. They worked together to save not just themselves, but all of us. The footage showed Lieutenant Lee's maintenance pod maneuvering near the spatial anomaly, followed by the successful containment of the distortion. They risked their lives using plans they had developed for an event they had never seen before. Zixtk continued, "This is not the behavior of a dangerous species. This is the behavior of a species that values survival, not just their own, but the survival of others as well." Grand Counselor Nix Vaughn stepped forward. "But Ambassador, they constantly imagine terrible events. In many of our cultures, this would be seen as inviting disaster." "Perhaps," Zixt conceded. "But yesterday's evidence suggests their approach works. They don't plan for disasters because they want them to happen. They plan because they're determined to survive them." The assembly members murmured among themselves. Zix could see he had made some progress, but many remained unconvinced. At that moment, Dr. Murphy entered the chamber with Admiral Pearson and Lieutenant Lee. The room fell silent as the three humans walked to the center. "Esteemed Assembly," Murphy began, "we understand your concerns about Earth joining the Confederation. We come from a different evolutionary path than most of your member species. Where many of you evolved in stable environments, humans faced constant change and danger." Admiral Pearson continued, "We don't prepare for disasters because we enjoy them. We prepare because in our history, those who didn't prepare didn't survive." Lieutenant Lee, still wearing her flight suit from the maintenance pod, stepped forward. "Yesterday I was able to help because I had run simulations of similar scenarios, not because I wanted it to happen, but because I wanted to be ready if it did." The assembly listened in silence. Then a Vexorian representative asked, "If we admit Earth to the Confederation, how do we know you won't bring your disasters with you?" Murphy smiled. "We can't promise disasters won't happen. No one can. What we can promise is that when disasters do happen, and they will, with or without humans, you'll want us on your side." After hours of further discussion, the assembly called for a vote. Zixtk held his breath as the results were tallied. By a narrow margin, Earth was accepted into the Galactic Confederation. The final treaty included a unique clause. Humans would serve as the Confederation's disaster response specialists. Their unusual ability to imagine and prepare for the worst possible outcomes was officially recognized as a valuable contribution to galactic society. After the signing ceremony, a young Vexorian diplomat approached Major Johnson, who had been unusually quiet since the crisis. "Major," the diplomat said hesitantly, "I've been wondering, if asking humans about the worst that could happen produces such interesting results, what happens if I ask what's the best that could happen?" Johnson grinned widely. "Now that's a question I'd be happy to answer." As the Major began describing human dreams of peaceful exploration, technological marvels, and friendship among the stars, Zixtk watched from across the room. The human spoke about positive possibilities with the same enthusiasm he had previously applied to disasters. Zixtk realized that humans weren't defined by their preparation for the worst. They were defined by their ability to imagine possibilities, both good and bad, and then work to make the good ones happen and prevent the bad ones. When he had asked his innocent question months ago, he had accidentally discovered humanity's greatest strength. They refused to be helpless in the face of any challenge, no matter how unexpected. That, more than any technology or resource, was what they brought to the stars. As he watched the humans and aliens speaking together with new understanding, Zixtk knew that the Confederation would never be the same again. And that, he decided, was probably a good thing.